confirmed that Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, has died at the age of 100. CNN's Wolf Blitzer has a look back now at President Carter's extraordinary life and career.
We just want the truth again.
Jimmy Carter was elected president nearly 2 years after the law-breaking and cover-ups of the Watergate scandal forced President Richard Nixon to resign. His candor seemed like a breath of fresh air.
There's a fear that our best years are behind us. But I say to you that our nation's best is still ahead.
James Earl Carter was born on October 1st, 1924. His father ran an agricultural supply store in Plains, Georgia. His mother was a nurse. He was smart enough and tough enough to receive an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. Just after graduation in 1946, he married Rosalind Smith. His naval career took him from battleships to the new nuclear submarine program, but when his father died in 1953, he left the military and returned to Georgia, where he spent the next 2 decades running the family peanut farm business and slowly and steadily beginning a political career that saw him elected governor of Georgia in 1970.
To use an old 1950s term, if there ever was a classic example of an inner-directed man, Jimmy Carter's it.
Isn't it a bit presumptuous to think that if death were a person, they would even have the time to consider any particular one of the more than 100,000 human lives that wink out every day? Death is a force of nature. Maybe even cruelty seems a bit beneath it somehow. If anything, shouldn't we expect death to be kind of ambivalent? To be honest, I think you actually kind of already do. In fact, I think this characterization is even more common than the malevolent one. I mean, even the version of death that shows up in the massively popular TV show Supernatural can pretty much be described this way, comparing humanity to a mere bacterium, not out of disdain, but merely to create a sense of scale.
My name is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
In 1976, the former Georgia governor went from being Jimmy Who to the White House. Not everyone in Washington was happy to see him. Early on, Carter was accused of presidential micromanaging, of excessive attention to detail. That mastery of details enabled Carter to negotiate the Camp David Peace Accords, a deal between Egypt and Israel that led to a peace treaty ending decades of war between their countries. His most difficult presidential days came after Iranian militants took dozens of Americans hostage in Tehran in late 1979. They were held for 444 days, and 8 U.S. servicemen died after President Carter ordered an elaborate rescue attempt that failed. The Iran hostage crisis was only one of the challenges that confronted President Carter.
We must face the fact that the energy shortage is permanent.
During Carter's term, Americans endured a sharp, steady increase in oil and gasoline prices, which forced everything to cost more. To some, Carter's stark comments began to sound like moralizing.
The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America.
In 1980, Carter faced Republican challenger Ronald Reagan, who exuded sunny optimism and asked voters a simple question.
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Jimmy Carter lost the election, but not his resolve to make a difference. He and Rosalind founded the Carter Center in part to promote peace, democracy, human rights, as well as economic and social development all over the world. Carter monitored elections for fairness. He went to North Korea and Cuba and met with leaders usually shunned by the U.S., including representatives of Hamas, the Palestinian organization both the U.S. and Israel have branded as terrorists.
This is a man who has a really unique commitment to public service. It really is a calling with him.
In autumn of 2002, Carter was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the culmination of an incredible career as a world leader and as a citizen.
I'm delighted and humbled and very grateful that the Nobel Peace Prize Committee has given me this recognition.
He still wasn't done. Carter remained active into his 90s, traveling, writing books, building Habitat for Humanity homes, news of the day. He criticized Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky, called George W. Bush's international policy, quote, the worst in history. But from your definition, you believe the United States, under this administration, has used torture.
I don't think it. I know it. Certainly.
He also took on President Donald Trump.
Does America want kind of a jerk as president?
Apparently, from his recent election, I never knew it before.
Carter survived a cancer scare in 2015 and kept going.
Didn't find any cancer at all.
When he attended George H.W. Bush's funeral in late 2018, he was the oldest of America's living presidents. He celebrated his own 100th birthday in 2024. His beloved wife, Rosalind, passed away in 2023. She'd been his steadfast partner through 77 years of marriage. Carter's diminished health prevented him from speaking at her memorial service, so their daughter Amy read a letter he wrote to Rosalind while deployed with the Navy 75 years earlier.
My darling, every time I have ever been away from you, I have been thrilled when I returned to discover just how wonderful you are. While I am away, I try to convince myself that you really are not, could not be, as sweet and beautiful as I remember. But when I see you, I fall in love with you all over again. Does that seem strange to you? It doesn't to me.
Husband, statesman, a connection to an era now gone, Jimmy Carter was a defender of values forever current. The Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty and set the stage potentially, unfortunately never happened, for an Israeli-Palestinian agreement as well. But then there was a formal peace treaty signing at the White House, on the North Lawn of the White House, and it was just an exciting moment, and he deserved an enormous amount and got an enormous amount of credit for bringing peace between Israel and Egypt. And interestingly, and it's important, all these many, many years later, there still is a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. There's diplomatic relations, an Israeli embassy in Cairo, and an Egyptian embassy in Tel Aviv. And Jimmy Carter deserves so much credit for that agreement, so we shouldn't forget it. But he also did other important things in terms of the 4 years that he was president of the United States. And I think it's also true, Rahel, that he also was an amazing former president. All these years where he was an ex-president, he really worked hard with the Carter Center to promote peace and good issues around the world. And he really devoted his life to making
part of his legacy.
Yes, and they were so close. They had this incredible marriage. They worked closely together on so many issues, and they were so devoted to not only their family and friends, but to the state of Georgia, indeed to our entire country.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, former President Jimmy Carter, the nation's 39th president, a man who redefined what a post-presidency could look like, died today at the age of 100. We look back at his extraordinary life. Good evening, I'm Allie Rogan. John Yang is away. We begin with breaking news tonight as we learn that former President Jimmy Carter has died. The 100-year-old, known for his humble beginnings and unlikely road to the White House, served from January 1977 to January 1981. History shaped Carter's one term in office, including an economic recession, the Iran hostage crisis, and the Camp David Accords between Israel and Egypt. Carter was this country's longest living former president, and he died today at his home in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by family. Special correspondent Judy Woodruff looks back at his towering life.
In December of 1974, there was a major headline on the editorial page of the Atlanta Constitution that said Jimmy Carter is running for what?
He was seemingly the longest of long shots. He jumped into the 1976 presidential race, and Jimmy Carter wound up celebrating on election night.
I pray that I can live up to your confidence and never disappoint you.
It was the pinnacle of a wide-ranging life that began in 1924 in Plains, Georgia. James Earl Carter was born to Lillian, a nurse, and Earl, a peanut farmer. After a Depression-era upbringing, he finished the U.S. Naval Academy and married hometown sweetheart Rosalind Smith. In time, the newly minted officer rose to the rank of lieutenant in the nuclear submarine service. But he cut short his Navy career after his father's death in 1953 so he could return to Georgia to try to revive the family's struggling peanut farm.
We've always worked for a living. We know what it means to work.
Within a few years, politics beckoned, and Jimmy Carter began his ascent, winning election as a state senator, and then in 1970, governor. He called for the state to transcend deep divisions over race and inequality.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over. No poor, rural, weak, or black person should ever have to bear the additional burden of being deprived of the opportunity of an education, a job, or simple justice.
Georgia law then limited governors to a single term, but Jimmy Carter had his eyes on a much bigger prize. On December 12, 1974, he announced he was running for president.
Jimmy who?
Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy who?
Outside his home state, candidate Carter began as a virtual unknown. Jimmy Who became a political punchline, even in Carter campaign films. But it was also an asset. Voters had soured on Washington after the Vietnam War and Watergate. And Mr. Carter embraced his outsider status and began climbing in the polls.
You'll recognize the imagery immediately. The movie follows a disillusioned knight after the Crusades. When he sees death approaching, he challenges the apparition to a game of chess. If he wins, death will leave him be. If he loses, well, we can guess. But amused, death assures him that he cannot win and that there is no escape. But amused, he agrees to play along. The game lasts several sessions, between which the two find ways to manipulate and deceive each other into losing. Death makes illegal moves. The hero knocks over the chessboard by accident. In the end, as Death promised, there was never any hope for the knight, and Death at last checkmates his victim. Although, while Death is distracted, 3 other would-be victims are able to use the opportunity to escape, which, for a knight freshly returned from the crusade,
he couldn't find a microphone.
In April 1976, he mused on his appeal in an interview with the McNeil-Lehrer Report, a precursor to the NewsHour.
There's an intensity of commitment to my campaign and a depth of sacrifice among people who volunteer to go all the way to New Hampshire, their own expense, to give up their vacation time, to go back later to Wisconsin. I had over 1,000 Georgians who went into Florida. Other candidates don't have this.
That connection with voters carried him to the Democratic nomination and on a course to face incumbent Republican Gerald Ford that November.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
Mr. Ford had been appointed vice president during Watergate and became president when Richard Nixon resigned in August of 1974. Years later, former President Carter spoke to Jim Lehrer on what it was like as a challenger debating a sitting president.
I had been quite successful in the primary season, but it was a very disturbing concept for me to be on the stage with the President of the United States. But I saw it as a good opportunity to let the people know that I could indeed deal on an equal basis, hopefully, with an incumbent president.
The two men faced each other 3 times that fall.
He says he's learned how to match unemployment with inflation. That's right. We've got the highest inflation we've had in 25 years right now.
But the third debate, just 2 weeks before the election, saw Mr. Carter on the defensive. He had given a candid, in-depth interview to Playboy magazine, and on his religious beliefs, he was quoted as saying, "I've looked on a lot of women with lust. I've committed adultery in my heart many times. This is something that God recognizes I will do, and God forgives me for it."
As you know, that Playboy interview could have cost me the election. It was a devastating blow to our campaign, and I thought the best way to handle it was to say, well, I'm sorry that the interview came out, but I couldn't deny that the answers in Playboy were my own answers.
Mr. Carter's lead steadily dwindled through the fall, but on Election Day, his strength in the South and the East was just enough to carry him to victory.